You know that feeling, right? When an emotion hits you so hard and so fast, it just completely takes over before you can even process what's happening. Well, turns out that's a universal human experience. And today, we're going to dive into the absolutely groundbreaking work of a psychologist named Paul Ekman, who figured out the hidden universal language that's written on all of our faces. So let's start right there. Why do our emotions hijack us like that? Why do we get completely swept away by anger or fear or sadness before our rational brain even has a chance to boot up? Well, the answer? It's a pretty amazing story about survival, evolution, and a scientific quest that literally took researchers to the ends of the earth. And here's the crazy part. You might be surprised to hear that this whole hijack thing, it's actually a feature, not a bug. Yeah, it's an ancient automatic alarm system that's built right into our brains, and its whole job is to keep us safe. Just think about a near miss in a car. You slam on the brakes, you swerve, your heart is pounding out of your chest, and this look of pure fear flashes across your face, all before you've even had a second to consciously think, whoa, that was close. I mean, this happens in milliseconds. Now, that speed can literally save your life, but it's also why we sometimes, overreact. This automatic system just completely bypasses our logical thinking self. Now, for the longest time, the common belief in science was that how we show our emotions was all learned from our culture, like language. An American smile might mean something totally different from a Japanese smile. But then this psychologist, Paul Ekman, he comes along with this radical idea, something he got from Charles Darwin. He asked, what if our core expressions are actually universal, a shared biological inheritance? And that right there, that set the stage for a huge scientific showdown. See, Ekman had a great theory, but a theory isn't enough. He needed proof. He had to figure out a way to settle the question once and for all. Is there really a universal language of emotion? But there was a big, big problem. If these expressions were really universal, then why did travelers and anthropologists, guys like the famous Ray Birdwhistell, keep reporting that people in different cultures seemed so different? They'd see people smiling when they were unhappy or showing emotions in ways that just seemed totally alien. It was a major paradox. It just didn't add up. And Ekman's solution to this was absolutely brilliant. He came up with the idea of display rules. He said, okay, maybe our innate expressions are universal, but the rules for when we show them are learned from our culture. It's kind of like this. We all have the same facial hardware, right? But our culture gives us the software that tells us when to turn it on or off. He actually proved this in a famous study. He found that when Japanese and American students watched a disturbing film alone, they both showed the exact same expression of disgust. But when a scientist came into the room, the Japanese participants would mask that disgust with a polite smile. Same feeling, different rules for showing it. Okay, but there was still a pretty big loophole. The skeptics came back and said, hold on, what if everyone around the world just learned these expressions from watching John Wayne movies or TV shows? And they had a point. To really truly prove his theory, Ekman had to close that loophole. He had to find a group of people who had never been exposed to the outside world. And this is what led him on an absolutely incredible journey. He realized he needed to find what was essentially a Stone Age culture, a group of people totally isolated, to conduct the ultimate test. The stakes couldn't have been higher. And he found them. Deep in the remote highlands of Papua New Guinea, he found the Four People. This was a culture completely untouched by the modern world. They had no written language, they'd never seen a movie, and they'd had almost no contact with any outsiders. They were the perfect group to finally answer this huge question. So the way he did the experiment was actually pretty simple, but really effective. Ekman would tell them a short story with a clear emotion, something like, his child has died, and then he'd show them a few photos of American faces and ask them to point to the one that matched the story. And when he asked the Four People to pose these emotions themselves, wow, the results were just undeniable. I mean, just look at these photos right here. That's a 4-man showing enjoyment and another showing sadness. You don't need a translation for that. It's a language we all understand instantly. The results were just conclusive. The Four People, time and time again, linked the right faces to the right stories, especially for happiness, anger, disgust, and sadness. And then, get this, they did a reverse test. They showed photos of the Four People's expressions to American college students who had no trouble at all identifying the emotions. They even replicated the whole thing with another isolated group, the Danny People, and got the same results. It was settled. Darwin had been right all along. Okay, so we've established that these core expressions are universal. But that discovery just opens up a new, deeper question, doesn't it? How does this whole system actually work inside our brains? I mean, what's actually triggering these ancient emotional programs?
Well, Ekman has a name for the mechanism, auto-appraisers. The best way to think about them is like these little high-speed scanners running in the background of your brain. They're constantly, and I mean constantly, scanning everything around you and even what's going on inside you without you even being aware of it. And what are they looking for? They're searching for a match to anything stored in what he calls your emotion alert database.
So here's the play-by-play, and it happens lightning fast. Step 1, an event occurs. Step 2, your brain scans for a match. Step 3, it finds one in your alert database. And boom, step 4, the emotion activates. And this all happens in a fraction of a second, way before you're consciously aware of anything. It's an unbelievably efficient and totally automatic process. So you're probably wondering, where do all these triggers in our alert database even come from? Well, they basically come from two places. First, you've got evolution. This gives us all the universal, big picture themes. These are the deeply programmed fears and joys we all share as humans, like the threat of physical harm or losing someone we love. And then second, you have your own personal experience. This is what adds all the specific variations, the things that are unique triggers just for you, like a fear of dogs or getting super annoyed at slow drivers. And once that emotion gets triggered, something really interesting happens. We enter what psychologists call the refractory period. Now, what this means is that for a brief window of time, our thinking brain literally cannot accept information that doesn't fit the emotion we're feeling. So if you're angry, your brain is actively looking for more reasons to justify that anger, not to question it. This is exactly why it's so hard to reason with someone or even with yourself when you're in the middle of a really strong emotion. Okay, so this brings us to the big practical million-dollar question, right? If we understand how all this stuff works, can we change it? Can we just go into our brain's database and delete the emotional triggers we don't like? Well, the answer we're getting from neuroscience is pretty sobering. A leading neuroscientist named Joseph Ledoux puts it this way. He says that conditioned fear learning, well, it might just be an indelible form of learning. Indelible, meaning it's permanent. It's literally written into the connections between our brain cells. And when you think about it from an evolutionary perspective, that makes perfect sense. Our brain's emotional system was designed to be an open database, always adding new potential threats, always learning what to be afraid of. It was built for survival, and that means it's really, really good at keeping those triggers in, not at letting them go.
So, what's the bottom line here? We can't erase our triggers.
But, and this is the really important part, we can change our relationship to them. That's the empowering takeaway. We can't hit delete, but by understanding why we feel what we feel, we can change how we relate to those feelings. This knowledge gives us the power to spot the emotion as it's starting, to maybe shorten that refractory period, and to choose a better response instead of just getting hijacked by it all over again. So I want to leave you with this final thought. Your emotions aren't random noise. They're echoes of what kept our ancestors alive for thousands and thousands of years. They're ancient messages sent from the oldest parts of your brain. So knowing that, how will you choose to listen to them now?